The harsh slant of afternoon light spilled into the glass-encased boardroom like judgment from the heavens themselves. The beams sharp and golden as they sliced through the cool, filtered air of Halston Global's New York headquarters, igniting specks of dust in the otherwise sterile perfection of the modern corporate cathedral, a sanctuary of polished stone, silent climate control, and surgical precision where empires were built or burned with the quiet nod of a committee or the sharp flick of a signature. And in the center of this engineered stillness stood Thomas Ryker, Executive Vice President of Strategic Affairs, wearing a dark gray Armani suit that seemed stitched not just from fabric, but from quiet authority and long hours of dominance. In high-level negotiations, his expression carved in stone, his finger pointed like a dagger toward Cassandra Vale, the woman standing opposite him, frozen mid-sentence on a call. Her tan business suit perfectly pressed but clinging tighter now under the weight of invisible pressure. Her brow furrowed in concern as the voice on the other end of the phone delivered what was clearly unwelcome news. Though whatever it was, it paled compared to the firestorm gathering in Ryker's sharp gray eyes, which did not blink, did not shift, only burned with betrayal, disbelief, and perhaps even something more, disappointment, the kind that comes not from an adversary's failure but a protégé's. For Cassandra wasn't just another director in risk oversight. She was his chosen successor, the rising star he had mentored, defended, challenged, and occasionally clashed with in ways that made the office gossip mill hum with speculation. And for all her brilliance, all her fierce attention to detail and unnerving ability to anticipate boardroom ambushes before they were even planned, she stood now looking like someone who had just been caught with her hand in the vault, the phone slipping slowly from her ear as her attention was drawn full force to Ryker's tone. His words clipped and low but sharp enough to flay. "Tell me, Cassandra, how exactly does a restricted asset transfer authorization signed under your credentials, time-stamped during your presence in this very building and up in the hands of a flagged entity in Zurich that our own compliance team blacklisted last fiscal quarter?" And silence followed, not because there was no answer, but because there were too many and none of them sufficient, not for this room, not for this man, and not with the kind of evidence now laid out on the obsidian conference table between them, a series of printed audit logs, screenshots, flagged signatures, metadata trails. Ryker never came unprepared. And today he had arrived like a prosecutor with a closing argument in hand, and Cassandra's eyes, usually cool and calculating, betrayed a flicker of panic before hardening into something colder, deeper, not quite defiance but not surrender either, the look of someone who had known this moment might come but hoped, until the last minute, that it wouldn't, and she drew a breath, slow and steady, the kind that resets not just lungs but posture and poise, then said, "I can explain, but not in the way you're expecting." And Ryker leaned forward just slightly, enough to cast a long shadow across the table as he replied, "You'd better not explain it in the way I'm expecting, because what I'm expecting is an indictment." And she flinched, not visibly, but internally, a ripple of old wounds reopening, because this wasn't just about the transfer or the money or the broken protocol. This was about trust, and about what it meant when it was suddenly withdrawn after being the lifeline that pulled you through so many impossible days in a world that consumed loyalty like paper and fire. And so she didn't defend herself. Not yet. Instead, she asked, "Who else knows?" And Ryker's answer came with the same iron certainty that had made him both feared and respected in every boardroom on 3 continents. Legal, audit, the chairman. HR doesn't know yet. I gave you that much grace, and that was the dagger. Not the evidence, not the tone, but that word, grace, a mercy extended like the last thread of rope to a person already slipping off the ledge. And Cassandra closed her eyes for the briefest moment, then reopened them and began to speak, not quickly, not defensively, but carefully, choosing each word like it mattered, because it did. Because the room was already a courtroom, and she was already standing trial in the only way that mattered. In the world she had spent the last 11 years surviving, not by telling the truth, but by telling the truth well, and so she said, 3 months ago I began noticing small irregularities in the approval logs, time-stamped executions that didn't match final stage sign-offs, particularly on dormant accounts. Not enough to flag immediately, but enough to raise questions. I submitted quiet inquiries to internal IT under a non-critical security audit to avoid triggering alerts. But what came back was sanitized, too clean. Logs had been scrubbed. I didn't tell you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't know how deep it went. And Ryker's jaw shifted slightly, a micro-expression that in lesser men would have meant nothing, but in him was a seismograph of doubt, of wheels turning behind the fortress of his mind. And she pressed on, the Zurich account was a decoy. I triggered the transfer with intentionally manipulated credentials. Mine, to flush out whoever's been rerouting dormant funds into offshore sinkholes disguised as abandoned ventures. Bravestone Equity, Argus Four Holdings, Lurian Trust. All shell firms that link back to a single IP chain bouncing between Jakarta, Vancouver, and Brussels. Someone inside Halston is laundering money, someone high enough to rewrite logs and deep enough to know when I was getting close. The transfer was bait. And it worked, and for a moment, nothing in the room moved, not the air, not the light, not even Ryker's expression, which remained unreadable as he slowly reached for the folder and flipped back to the first page, scanning it again with fresh eyes. The way a prosecutor rereads a testimony that suddenly doesn't sound like perjury anymore, but something more dangerous. Whistleblowing, and Cassandra continued, her voice steadier now, emboldened not by safety but by necessity. There's a backdoor in our system architecture, not a software flaw, but a human one. Someone in systems has root access masking as routine admin privileges. Someone who's been overriding timestamps and reassigning IP chains to make it look like the breaches originate from low-risk user accounts. Mine this time, before me. It was Lars in procurement. Before him, it was Kavya in compliance. Look at the pattern. Always mid-level management, always in proximity to sensitive authorizations. Always someone too junior to fight back but too senior to escape notice if things blow up. This is a cover operation using Halston as its engine, and she slid a second file across the table, thinner, hand-assembled, less official-looking, a dossier compiled outside company servers, untraceable, something she had printed at a private co-op 2 blocks from the building just that morning. And Ryker didn't open it immediately, just stared at her for a long, waited moment before finally asking, "You're telling me this was your play? That you let yourself become the fall guy to smoke out someone bigger?" And Cassandra nodded once, slow and deliberate, the kind of nod that isn't just an answer but a declaration of war. And Ryker looked down at the second file, then opened. It and what he saw inside shifted something in his posture, not shock, but recognition. The kind that comes when a suspicion you never wanted to believe is finally confirmed. And for the first time since you walked into the room, his tone changed, not softened, but adjusted, calibrated like a new negotiation table had just been built between them, and he asked, "Does anyone else know this?" And Cassandra replied, "Only you. And now, whoever's watching us," and with that, both of them turned, ever so slightly, toward the reflective sheen of the glass wall, not because there was someone there, but because they both understood that in Halston Global, information was never private and silence was never empty. It was filled with ears, eyes, signals, and power, and now that power had shifted, slightly but irreversibly, like tectonic plates realigning beneath a city just before the quake dot between them. And he asked, "Does anyone else know this?" And Cassandra replied, "Only you." And now, whoever's watching us, and with that, both of them turned, ever so slightly, toward the reflective sheen of the glass wall, not because there was someone there, but because they both understood that in Halston Global, information was never private and silence was never empty. It was filled with ears, eyes, signals, and power. And now that power had shifted, slightly but irreversibly, like tectonic plates realigning beneath a city just before the quake.